families out there. Thank you for joining us today, for getting through the cracks. This is our second edition. Welcome back to anyone who was with us last week. It was a really enjoyable lunchtime chat last week, and I'm really excited for today as well. My name is Erin, and I'm a lecturer in applied and educational theatre at the University of Exeter. And I'm also very privileged to be a board member of Theatre Alibi, who are our host organization for today. So I want to say a big thank you to Theatre Alibi and to the University of Exeter for making these lunchtime chats possible. I, for one, have been, I think, really keen and hungry for these conversations. So, and I think by the numbers that have been joining us last week and this week, I think I'm not alone in that. So welcome, everyone. And with that, I'm going to move to the important bit, which is introducing our panelists today. Oh, it's such a privilege and a joy. These are such beautifully curated events. So I'm delighted to introduce you, first of all, Dr. Elaine Faull.
Hello.
Hello, Elaine. It's nice to see you. I'm going to read your little bio out so people can revel in your wonderment. So Elaine is an independent audience evaluator and researcher in impact on performance in young children. Elaine's recently completed her PhD from the University of Exeter Drama Department, and her longitudinal interdisciplinary research contributes to the fields of audience studies, education studies, memory studies, and emotional well-being, and discusses the impact of theatre performance on primary age children's learning. Throughout the 3 years of her PhD research, she focused on 3 case study productions from Theatre Alibi, performed in primary school settings. Elaine has been a secondary drama teacher, a head teacher, a director of a community arts centre, and is currently an independent evaluator for a range of arts. Welcome, Elaine.
Thank you.
We're delighted that you're here. Our second panelist that I'm going to introduce is Heidi Vaughn. Heidi is the artistic director and joint CEO of Travelling Light Theatre Company here in England. She's worked under various roles as a freelance director, a head of education, a performer, a facilitator, and a director of young people's theatre, as well as artistic director for 3 different companies. All of this work has been rooted in performance for young audiences, family, and community theatre. She's worked with organisations all over the UK, including sustained periods at Bristol Old Vic, Point, Oxford House, the Egg Bath. She's also had sustained periods working internationally in Ireland and the Middle East. She is a deep supporter of local to global organizations. Heidi has a long association with Travelling Light, having seen their flagship production Into the West in 1995 when she was just 15. As a result of this, Heidi became an admirer of the company and its ethos, watching over for her appointment. Welcome, Heidi.
Thank you.
I'm delighted to have you with us. And our final panelist, I'm going to do my best, Erica. It's Erica Vaughn de Kerkhof. Can you say it?
Erika van de Kerkhof.
Yours was much better.
Almost similar.
Erica's been working with Artemis in the Netherlands for over 18 years. Her main role is to oversee how Theatre Artemis shapes education, particularly by involving teachers in the work that they do. Theatre Artemis is a pioneering theatre company for young audiences based in Den Bosch, who perform in theatres and festivals around the Netherlands and abroad. Theatre Artemis like to seek out and experiment with new forms of theatre. They create work that offers children and young people challenging experiences that teach them to have confidence in the unknown and in themselves. Their work is brave, anarchic, interactive, and often hilarious. The company also creates innovative, independent art projects in which artists and young people collaborate. Welcome, Erica.
Nice to be
It's a delight to have the 3 of you with us today. We've got 3 really different specialisms, 3 really different areas of expertise, and I think that's wonderful. So I'm going to kick us off with an initial question. And we'll get started with the conversation. And then those of you that are listening, please do pepper us with your questions, and we'll keep a little eye on the Q&A box. One last thing to say is, if you notice a question that comes in the Q&A and you really like that question, do feel free to upvote it or say that you like it, and then we'll know that there's been popular consensus that a certain question needs to be asked, and we will listen to your democratic voting. But the first question I'd like to start off with, I think, is about the moment that we're in. So I'm curious about your different personal experiences of the last 9 months. So we have someone here who's more of a researcher, someone who's an artistic director, someone who's in charge of education, 3 different specialisms. What have your experiences of the last 9 months been in terms of responding and adapting? What do we need to be in this new world, I think, is the sub question. It's just a small one, just to start off with. I think thinking about what is our place and is that evolving? Is that changing? Is there anyone who'd like to start off by having a go at that first question?
I don't mind kicking us off, Erin.
Elaine.
I would say my last 9 months has been incredibly hectic, and that firstly I finished my PhD, and if I put just briefly in context, I worked with over 900 children in 31 schools over the last 3 years, so I've loved going into schools. So I finished my PhD, and then Theatre Alibi asked me if I'd come and evaluate their latest work, which is Down to Earth. And that's been a joy, just to be able to work with the company again. And wherever possible, get into schools. And the issue in the last, I would say, 6 weeks has been not being able to get into schools, or whether the schools feel that having an extra person in the classroom. So I've had to be very adaptable. From normally I would use an art space method as well as a visual questionnaire. I have to just think ahead to make sure that I haven't touched those documents that the children are going to use for 72 hours, and I have to keep away from the children when I go in. And so it's been very different, very interesting though, and a joy to be evaluating this piece as well.
And exciting that there is work going into the schools and
Absolutely.
that there is still research into that.
Yeah.
Heidi or Erica, how have the last 9 months been?
Well, it's been a bit of a wild time, hasn't it? For want of a better expression. I mean, none of us put this in our business plans, did we? And so I think there's been some really interesting choices needed to be made by artistic leaders. And I use the word choices meaningfully, really, because I think, you know, whether you're an artistic director in the rehearsal room, or whether you're looking at the organisation as a whole, actually at a time when resources are being closed down and there's a lot of uncertainty, actually being able to make really clear choices has been really important for us. And none of us have a map, do we? Or a timeline in terms of what's going to happen. And we keep having these kind of false starts and then having to withdraw back. And it's almost been as much about a period of unproducing as it has been about a period of producing work. So I think for me, like I said, I haven't got a map, but what I suppose we've tried to do at Travelling Light is have a really clear compass about what we're trying to do. And that's to do with making sure that we're really, really rooted in our values as a company, so that we're making real choices about every single offer that we put out there. And often the strongest value that seems to come up for us is, of course, about social justice and making sure that young people have access to the highest quality art that we can possibly enable. And the other part of that, I suppose, has been about our constitution and about the kind of essence of what the organisation is on a piece of paper, which is that we are a publicly subsidised organisation. I know there'll be people here listening that won't necessarily be part of that remit, and we're constituted as a charity. We're not a venue, we're not a commercial company, we're not a cooperative, and really making sure that we rooted ourselves into being the most charitable that we could be at this time. And that's an interesting provocation, isn't it? I mean, what does it mean to be really charitable as artists? At a time of national crisis, actually, and national trauma, where is the greatest value in our charitable work? And for us, that meant doing a lot of work in terms of with young people accessing frontline services, those that we know from the research already underway, and thank goodness for researchers, that these young people are the ones that are going to be most affected by the pandemic, and for the longest, actually. And this is going to hang over for a longer period of time than whether we're in and out of lockdown or what tiers we're in and out of. So that's really been key for us in terms of anchoring us during a time of really rapid change, where actually things can change from day to day, overnight. And in fact, today is one of those days of change, isn't it, as the tiers are announced. And lots of people, I'm sure, will be frantically celebrating or in that act of unproducing as we speak right now. So yeah, for us, it's been wild. It's the best term. But during this time, we have managed to find an anchor to root our responses to. And that's been really important in terms of artistic leadership for ourselves, for our company, and for our messaging to our audiences and partners at this time.
It sounds like there's been a real values check there at the heart. And my understanding of Travelling Light is that there's historically been a lot of touring activity.
Exactly.
And that it's meant not that. Are you
Exactly
working more
that.
in your geographic base?
Well, what's happened, I think, for us is that we haven't really changed what we do in terms of storytellers, but we have changed how we do it. So that's there's been a very subtle shift there. And no, we're not getting into the van and touring up and down the country like we normally would do, but we are getting in the van and giving out other resources and working with Feed Bristol, which is our food parcel association, and also working in terms of a toys library and making sure that the van is used actively within the local community there. But no, our values are really important to us and have been for a very long time, really, about making sure that access to the arts, we're really making sure that we're feeding those young people that wouldn't typically be able to access the arts, which is why schools touring has been so important for such a long period of time for Travelling Light.
And I like that notion of the word feeding in multiple senses, right?
Exactly.
Literally feeding. And
exactly.
Feeding.
We need nutrition in lots of different ways, don't we?
Yes, we do. Erica, how about you? What's the process of adaptation look like for you in your work?
Yeah, well, because I'm dependent on what the company starts doing. And I'm dependent on what schools want, and that's been very different and very difficult because on the one hand, in the Netherlands, the message is children up to 12 are not as contagious or not transferring the disease as much. So you can just we can cuddle with 12-year-olds, which sounds a bit different. But you can actually. So, but you won't. But I mean, so the up to 12-year-old, it's okay. You can do anything. Right. They can do sports. They can go to school. They can. There's no problem. But on the other hand, you have to keep your distance to the teachers and all the other grown-ups in the school, and parents aren't allowed inside the school. And some schools don't allow us to come in. So, or us or any external person. So that's really on the choice of the school themselves. And sometimes the school board decides it's not okay, and then the school principal decides it is. So, but you have to really be searching for this school. Okay, we're welcome here. Oh, that's cool. Oh no, we're not welcome. So, and it changes every day. Well, not every 2 weeks, when our Prime Minister gives his famous press conferences. So it's the uncancelling, or the cancelling and the undoing, and it's been a big search. So on the one hand, you think, well, let's do it. Let's come up with plans that we can do in these times, and then the rules change, and then you can't do it. Yeah. So I think it has been quite a difficult time for me personally to find your way to what is important and what can you contribute to these times. And then we've had some amazing projects at schools where a principal said, well, my board says it's not okay, but I say it's very important in these times to just welcome you and let you be here for 3 days. And so that has been very wonderful. And we've produced this big whole play during this time. We premiered and then we stopped because we couldn't. So, well, it has been, we've been searching for ways to do that, but we've been also been finding ways to find a way to do things for schools and for children who can't come to the theater, and then we can come to them. But is that of the same value? And that's really a search for us at this point. Is it the same value to have the children come to the theater to see a performance that's really big and really absurd and really challenging and really sometimes boring and exciting and being there with 300 other kids who are experiencing the same thing, and doing a workshop in the classroom with maybe 2 teachers? Can that be of the same value? That's what we're searching for right now. And we're not, I can't say if it's yes or no yet. We have to try. So that's all the searching I've been doing in my part of this company.
Yes, and that searching, that was such a perfect segue to my next question. Thank you, Erica. That was ideal. I think that searching for the new models or the new ways of working is trial and error, isn't it, for all of us? Trying things and then being told we can't do them, or trying things and realizing that there might be a better way, and trying things we never thought we were ever going to try and realizing that we love them because they're closely aligned to our values. The search is a nice term for that. The next question I wanted to ask before I throw the door open to all of our attendees asking you some questions is about impact and audiences. So what Erica's just said, I think, is very good as a bridge to this question. I'm curious about how we're starting to think about audiences and impact, and looking forward as we try to plan in this world of unproducing, in this world of reinvention. What does it mean for us to be putting audiences at the heart of our plans, both in this kind of short-term model that we seem to be in, of like the kind of quick reactive, sort of quick turnover responsiveness that we need to have within the pandemic, but also in terms of some of those longer-term plans that might be cooking quietly in the background as we come out of the pandemic. What does it mean for us to put audiences and impact at the heart of that? And does it mean something different perhaps for you than it did before? And I'm using the word impact very purposefully because I know that Elaine's research has really looked at the long-term impact. I don't know, Elaine, if that prompts anything for you.
It does, but where do I start? There's there's so much. My PhD was based on how does the performances of Theatre Alibi help children learn, but the learn was in the broadest of ways. And just to put it in context, I only went into the elements of Theatre Alibi's work that were to do with primary age children in a school setting. So although they do perform in a theatre, for me, it was very much their school-based work, because I wanted to hear the voices of children rather than adults, because I think we're actually quite good at getting feedback from adults, but we don't always manage to get the feedback from children. And also I was very keen to get a very inclusive audience, because the research that I'd come across tended to be in theatres, tended to be with adults. And here I wanted to make sure that I had children across the 4 in fact, to 11 age range, children who came who are used to going to theatre. Some of them might have been, but the vast majority, the only experience that they had was Theatre Alibi, and for many of those children, this was their first opportunity to experience any form of theatre. So that you've got a breadth of where I'm coming from. I went into special schools, I went into community schools, I worked with all abilities, and I had an equal number of boys and girls, which was interesting, because at the time, I wasn't sure if the impact would be the same on boys as it was on girls, the same on different groups. And I can talk a lot more about that, but I know that I will go on about that if I'm not careful. But the impact is quite profound in so many different ways. So I looked at what the impact was. You've mentioned, Erin, that I think perhaps one of the most distinctive parts of my research was the fact that I went back to schools over a 2-year period. And in most cases, evaluators haven't got the time or the resources to be able to do that. So although I'd meet the children at the time that they had the performance, I'd observe them, I'd listen to anything that was post-performance, although the vast majority of children, that's it, you have the performance. So I was keen to evaluate the performance itself, the performance if teachers intervened, and I was also keen to go back after 3 months, after a year, and after 2 years. Not always with the same children, but it was one particular production that was followed all over that time. And you're talking about impact, and what I will say as a starter is that the longitudinal impact is phenomenal. It's children remember more, recall more, engage with the performance more after 3 months than they did post-performance. And what that's telling me is the fact that they've been mulling it over, they've been living it, they've been reworking it. And if just something for theatre makers out there, that performance will live on and be reinvented, and little tiny props or characters that it might have only been on for seconds can often be recalled and remembered lovingly after 2 years. With regard to the other forms of my research, I would just say that theatre performance does have a very positive emotional effect on children, whether you look at it through the eyes of an educationalist or whether you look at it through the eyes of just those children giving feedback. And maybe I'll talk more about it. And it's still happening more in Down to Earth. You mentioned audience, and in this particular case, Theatre Alibi went out and asked teachers in the summer, so what actually do you think would be helpful? And I think that's important. And what I've found so far is that the performance is just as important, if not more important, for the adults as it is for the children at the moment, because there's a real grief that they haven't been able to get visitors in, they haven't been able to offer that rich curriculum, and they're just so delighted that Theatre Alibi is coming in, you know, a one actress is coming in and things like that. So I'll stop there because I could just keep going on and on and on.
It's brilliant, Elaine. It's really lovely to hear you speak from the researcher perspective. I don't know about you guys, I feel quite emotional when you say that about the impact of the character kind of simmering and bubbling, and
yeah,
that long-term impact that we so rarely have resource to measure or to talk or to track. Impact audiences, Heidi or Erica, thoughts?
Well, I think for us, because we have been trying to find ways to connect to schools more, not only for a performance, just one happening, but finding projects that take longer time or that really make you connect to children, which is quite an interesting, different perspective, to work with schools for a longer period of time. And then the connection with the teachers and the connection with the children, which are sometimes quite different. You have to convince teachers that that it's okay that you don't know what the outcome will be, or that you'll start working somewhere and that we have in 6 weeks we'll do something, but we don't know now what it will be in 6 weeks. I think those conversations are really important to have, and we've been doing that even before this pandemic. But this unsureness, or this not knowing of what will happen, I think that's a really important part of working with children and working with schools, and starting somewhere and hoping there will be effect or will be impact, but I can't guarantee impact, and I refuse to. I won't set goals that will ensure them that the children will learn this, and this in this project with us, or in looking at this performance, but we'll try and go on an adventure together, and you have to trust us. We know what we're doing, but we don't know what it is, but we're doing it and we know what we're doing. So this unsureness, I think that's a major part of working with schools. While on the other hand, in the Netherlands, the vibe is to set goals for arts education and to have long-term learning lines through your school career that are set, and that you have to prove that you met all these goals. And we have to counterbalance that with some unsureness and some, and I think that's the real big adventure, and even especially in these times where schools want to welcome you. Some of them do, but if you say, but we don't know what it'll be in the end, is even a bigger challenge now. But you find that those schools who do want to do this, they're extra happy that it happened, and that they're sometimes some of the teachers think, okay, my principal said we are going to do this, okay, and then are so happy that something unexpected happened, which is a really, that's the impact. And that's what teachers learn. Okay, I don't have to know the outcome of everything that I do. But on the other hand, I worked at education for teachers for a long time as well. So I taught teachers about art, and then I was always saying to them, you have to know what your goals are. So there are two, as someone from an artist perspective, I can say, no, you don't have to know your goals, you have to do the adventure. And the teacher has to know, okay, this is part of the plan, not knowing is my plan. So, all those things, and that's what I find is extra interesting in these times, where the barriers are even higher to let other people in. I think it will be challenging for the next few years. Will be, are we welcome? Are we still welcome if we don't have these sets of goals? And I hope we will be, and I think some schools will definitely welcome us, but it's this working together and this feeling of connecting will be even more important, I think.
I really agree with that, and it's one of the reasons I'm valuing these kinds of conversations right now, is I do think we're stronger together as a sector if we join up our thinking, and we join up our mutual worry, and we join up our advocacy. So it's great to have events like this, I think, to hear you articulate some of the same challenges we're feeling in the UK, actually. And I'm really struck by what you just said about uncertainty and unsureness, and that being a gift and a positive. And it strikes me that Artemis has always sort of pushed the boundaries around aesthetic uncertainty of really wanting to challenge, what the aesthetic of work for young audiences can be, and what topics it can tackle, and then to also add a kind of pragmatic logistics uncertainty underneath that feels like a lot. Hmm.
You have to balance that out, yes.
Yeah, yes, find the balance that's doable in there somewhere.
Yes.
Heidi, any thoughts about audience and impact from your end?
Well, just picking up on that point really about uncertainty, and I mean, the act of creating art is that of uncertainty and the celebration of uncertainty, really. And it's only from that uncertainty really that we get an innovation. Otherwise, what we end up is with some kind of form of emulation, where things all look the same, because we make safe choices and safe decisions that we know work. So I think that's really, really important about that notion of unknown and innovation, and that those things coming hand in hand. You know, it's from that discourse of not quite knowing, and not quite knowing what the product is, not quite knowing what the next step in the rehearsal room might be, that actually you begin to find those fresh green shoots, or you go down paths that just don't work and then you come back and you find different ones. You know, it's not always that simple. I think in terms of audiences for me, for us at Travelling Light, I mean, like so many, we're already quite deeply connected to grassroots communities. We're sat in the middle of a settlement, a Barton Hill settlement, that is surrounded by all kinds of brilliant organisations like Children's Mental Health Services and Somali Action Group and the Family Centre. And what this time has meant for us is about making the space to listen. And by that, I mean, really listen, really, really listen. And our place, like I mentioned before, about, you know, what is our place as an arts charity in the middle of a pandemic, and how can we listen to what is now being said is needed or necessary or wanted. What was really, really important for us in terms of our relationship with our audience, and of course audiences are complicated. Do we mean individuals? Do we mean families? Do we mean, you know, gatekeepers or schools? What's been really important to us is that those beneficiaries, for want of a better term really, don't just become nameless victims with no agency over what happens. You know, so the idea of putting an activity pack together and sent out and then off you go, that kind of felt wrong for our approach. What we wanted to focus on was about a meaningful connection that was sustainable over a period of time, and having conversations, backwards and forwards creative exchange, where resources were about making and playing, and just like Eric is saying, not necessarily a prescriptive or polished outcome to these offers fundamentally. And that's been really important to us. And I think by working really at that frontline level with key workers that are dealing with some really difficult cases at the moment, I don't think we should underestimate some of the impact this has had in real terms on real people's lives and on real people's livelihoods, and making sure that we can do what we can to support what is happening in terms of a bottlenecking of services, as more and more people are needing to access those, felt really, really key to us in terms of our deep local offer. Our wider audience offer has really been about trying to solve problems for people, trying to make life a bit easier, and really deal with some specific challenges around this time. So whether that's supporting schools with their recovery curriculum, and there's been so much positive conversation with schools, and just like Theatre Alibi, you know, relationships with schools over decades actually as companies, where they're talking about what we can do in terms of creativity in the classroom, especially after our period of homeschooling and so much creativity was seen at home. All the challenges around creativity kind of opened up opportunities really. How schools deal with not being able to leave the classroom to go for a Christmas trip, you know, the increased number of children that are now not engaging within the school system, that if you are more vulnerable within that school system, then actually your chance of re-engaging after either the main lockdown or periods of isolation has been stripped away. So really we've tried to kind of do what we can to support those kind of multiple agencies. I mean, I suppose to me what this time has done is really highlight inequality. I mean, we all know we're not born equal, don't we? We all know, which is why we do the work we do, that you know, families have different cultural collateral, which is why going into schools is such a key leveller in terms of our work. And I think for me, nothing has been more prevalent in this time than this. So from conversations with kind of frontline workers at the family centre and families coming into that space who are talking about not having any pencils, you know, households of multiple occupancy, multiple generations, often with shared facilities. We live around, in terms of our base in Barton Hill, about 20 tower blocks, which are traditionally small spaces, and yeah, it's not easy living there. So from children that have really, really frontline needs to, like I said, the schools that are saying we can't put on our Christmas nativity, what can you do to support us this year? You know, we've tried to respond as and where we can in terms of benefiting those audiences.
And that feels so responsive and so rooted in your geographic place, in your kind of grassroots way of working. Is that going to influence your plans going forward longer term, do you think?
Well, I think there's something really interesting that kind of came up in the conversation last week, which is something that I don't have the answer to. So hands up right now, I don't have the answer, which is I think there's a really interesting tension that is beginning to come into our work, which is both the need to be really responsive and to feed wherever we can and offer that nutrients and that creativity and joy in terms of frontline services, but also acknowledging that the process of making art can take time, and that's okay. And people and artists are simply trying to make the best they can at this time. I mean, I'm sure we're surrounded by people tuning into this that are just trying to do the best they can in really difficult circumstances in the middle of a global pandemic. And I think sometimes we don't give ourselves that context of saying the world is a really difficult place right now. Like we talked about that challenge of producing and unproducing. We've had a couple of projects that have kind of been in stop-start. You know, we were about to go into filming and then we had lockdown 2. You know, we're now Bristol going to be in quite a high level tier in terms of tier 3. So it feels ethically uncomfortable to bring people back into the rehearsal room. So there's some interesting ethical choices around how much work we do at this time. So yeah, I mean, I don't have the answer. I do know some things take longer than others. And that might be the crux of it at this time in terms of our business planning, and say, look, there are these things that we can do and we can turn around relatively quickly and with relatively light resourcing. But there are other things that actually, as artists and theatre makers, we are still grappling with the how, which is with us dealing with different forms and what that means, and how we translate our artistry from theatre makers that celebrate live performance and storytelling and community into slightly different, the non-cancelable offer. You know, that we picked apart last week. Yeah. So yeah, the answer is I just, hands up, don't quite know. But it's a period of change, and that's where actually for us I think it's really important to keep on trying to have space to unpick and to think forward with our values and our constitutional kind of prerogatives at the centre of what we do.
Yeah. And I certainly feel, you know, when I'm not working at the university, I'm a co-director of a company called Doorstep Arts. And when you were describing earlier about your values check moment with Travelling Light, I was thinking we've absolutely had the same experience. You know, what do our values in motion look like right now? Yeah. What does it mean to really walk our talk being of service to our community, but also how do we ensure that we're continuing to push the boat in terms of artistic integrity, in terms of excellence, in terms of challenge, thinking about Artemis's work. We've just had a really good question come in, which links to that. I'm segueing beautifully, aren't I? That was such a good segue. And I'm going to absolutely mispronounce this name, so I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm going to do my best. And I'm hoping my mic is working okay. Can you hear me okay, Panelists? Ish? In and out? Okay, I'll talk slow and hope it decides to cooperate. I would like to encourage our attendees to start asking some questions. We've had a good couple of them come through initially. So a first question from Birut Banavichutsi, that's my best guess at a pronunciation, who is a choreographer and artistic director of Densima Dance Theatre based in Lithuania. And he says he's been attending some online meetings recently where there were questions about the quality of the performance for children. So questions, I think, they're about artistic quality of performance for children. And he says, what is for you quality of performance? Which is a great question. So what is for you quality of performance? And I think this returns nicely to some of the things we were saying about Artemis's work a minute ago in terms of challenge or provocation, perhaps, around what that kind of work for children can be. I know there have been some really bold and amazing examples of Artemis's work. And Elaine, I imagine that might raise for you other questions about what quality of performance means measuring evaluation. Would anyone like to answer that question? Or have a go?
It sounds like a very small question to answer. No, I think it's a difficult question to answer because I think artistic quality can differ from country to country and from situation to situation. But what I think the quality of our performances can be is this challenging children and the audience to engage in the performance, even though it's sometimes is quite absurd or abstract. But on the other hand, sometimes giving them a finger so they can just grasp, get a hold of it and just grasp that, and then exploring the world for them. And I think that's part of what is artistic quality, that it's not all that you have to work as an audience to be part of what you're looking at. And I think that's the most important part.
Erica, can you give us an example of a moment in Artemis's work that you think was a nice example of a bold choice around an audience having to work?
Lots of but one of the things is we have these 3-day performances that take 3 days that we take to schools. So it's part of the whole school day for 3 days in a row. So there's an example, and we have quite different concepts that all 3-day shows, 3-day performances. And there's one that's called the nog niet ontdekte dier. So it's about an animal that's not been discovered yet. And this animal appears in school and might be dangerous or not, or might be very friendly, but we don't know anything about this animal, which is, and the first steps were you see him in the schoolyard and you see him hanging around, and then he comes in, it appears that he has been in the school because we see all these pink traces everywhere. So, well, and some children are quite scared of this strange animal that's around there. But and what the nice thing is that after 3 days they are very curious about it, and they were going to miss him. They're very glad he was there, and then now he's gone, and where is he? So this, well, it's kind of a leap that they make in these 3 days, from being really scared, having nightmares, which is, well, as the education department, that's not really what you want. But on the other hand, knowing that after 3 days they will want to embrace him and be sad to see him go, I think those leaps you can make, this engagement you can catch from children, that's one of the examples of things we've been doing. And I think our well, this uncertainty, because some school, well, the teachers on the first day, and they don't want children having nightmares either, but you have to find a way together to make it safe and to feel like you can safely explore what's going on. So yeah, well, I hope that answers some of your.
It does. I just wanted a visual in my head of a moment, so that was perfect. Thank you. I'll just thoughts on what quality is.
I think sorry, Heidi.
Well, I think that's a really interesting notion in terms of what is quality performance. Because at this time, we're trying to work out what performance is as well, aren't we? I mean, hasn't the notion of what theatre is completely changed and what it can be? And so it kind of feels like there's a two-pronged question there.
Yeah.
I'm quite sceptical over quality being a sole aim and how we define that, really, because I think no one goes out to make a bad show, do they? Does anyone try to do that? I mean, I don't know. I could be wrong. But I think if we fixate ourselves too much on quality, we become fearful of failure. And we become, like I've mentioned before, we end up with a process of emulation rather than that of interrogation. And we begin to kind of serve the wrong master, is my concern on it. I think there's some really interesting words that can be associated around quality that might be more useful in terms of semantics. So, you know, is this show of the now? Is this show, does it innovate the artist's practice in any way? Does it ask any universal questions of the world around us? Does it have something in it that is a communal appreciation that I mean, very often we don't just get children audiences, do we? We get adults in the room as well. So is there a benefit for a whole kind of spectrum of people? Is it accessible? Is it representational? For me, those words are much more useful when I'm looking at work and generating work and also interrogating my own practice, which we have to do, we have to self-critique, than it is to just solely use the word quality.
Yes, thank you. Those were provocations. Elaine, what were you going to say?
Well, I think quality, like Heidi's just said, is an interesting word. And I think that when you're applying that to children's theatre, sometimes there is the misapprehension that to be working for children, you can get away with things that actually don't have the same amount of quality. And I think there are some companies that may think along those lines. I think certainly there are some people within society who think along those lines, that children doesn't matter. But from my experience, actually the quality when you're producing for children must be as good, if not better, because they will either vote with their feet by actually walking out or starting to throw things at the performers. You know, you haven't got a kind of audience who are used to going to the theatre, so they will tell you if they don't like the quality. my view is that from what I've seen, and not only Theatre Alibi, but Travelling Light and other companies I've seen producing work for theatre, the quality of children's theatre is outstanding in most cases. And if I sort of unpick quality a bit more, I agree with you that it could be, well, either a monetary thing, well, how much money has been spent on this, or how much do the props look authentic and all things like that. But I think it's more than that. And I'm going to come back to, is the experience for the child authentic? Is it something that they really believe in? And that they are able to forget that they are in a hall, or forget that they are in a theatre, and forget that they are in a classroom even, and they get drawn into that very powerful story telling. And I agree with you, Erica. I would use the word challenging, because I think you can take children to emotional areas in stories and in theatre that you can't do in other areas. That gives a responsibility in that the quality has to be really good and the company have to be responsible. But actually the quality there is important, and it can be, how do you judge that quality? Do you judge it on the class, you know? And I've been in classes where teachers have said at the end, thumbs up, how many of you who enjoyed that? And, you know, up we go like that. And that's enjoyment, that's not necessarily quality. But the advantage of going back and talking to children is that you really underpin what that quality was. And it could be very surprising that you would never, ever know. It could be a child who believes that seeing that performance at that time changed their life. And I've been very privileged to be in that position where children have told me that. It also could be the way, a quality of how the performance lives on. So the way that children reinvent and bring their own creativity and actually make the performance something that then becomes their own. So whilst I accept the question on quality, I think it's a really big one to unpick, but not necessarily, you know, one that we need to be able to justify an answer, particularly now in these kind of times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it relates to a question that's sort of simmering at the back of my mind that I haven't quite cooked all the way, which is about value and worth of the work. I'll see if I can keep cooking it. I might be able to ask it by the end, because I think there's a job of advocacy that needs doing right now around theatre for young audiences and theatre for children, and a way that we can articulate our worth using our own language, our own codes, our own definitions of things, which is why I really value some of the things that Heidi's just said, is saying, no, these are the terms of reference I want to use. This is how we describe quality within our framework. I think there's an assertiveness in that that's really helpful right now. We've just had another really lovely question come in, which I'm going to read out to you. From Sarah Samuel from the University of Exeter, and she's also doing some work with the Northcott Theatre right now. And it's picking up on some of the things we were saying about teachers and asking teachers what they need. So she says, we spoke about asking teachers what they want. How do we separate theatre and its impact on young audiences from hardcore education and the work a theatre does as being just another addition to the curriculum? So this notion of the theatre offer as being apart from the real work of the curriculum, I think gets at some of those questions of value, actually, that I'm dancing around. Any thoughts in response to Sarah's question?
Well, shall I kick it off again? In that, I'm very keen that, I think Theatre Alibi would say at their core, and I'm guessing it's the same for Travelling Light, is that education is at its very broadest sense. It's not about going in and providing educational objectives. It's not about going in with a particular subject or a particular content that the teachers might use. It's more about that emotional engagement rather than developing the child as a whole person. And I think most teachers actually at their core want that. Certainly the feedback that came through to Alibi in the summer was, we want something that actually is part of the recovery curriculum, but that it actually speaks to the children now at this time and can help with their well-being. So down to earth, the particular production that I'm focusing at the moment is, to put it bluntly, a lost astronaut who is lost from her family and lost from everyone around her. And one of the gratifying things has been the way the children have empathy with that particular character and want to give their views. And one thing that I've seen, it goes back a little bit to the quality question, is that speaking to the children and hearing them, they can so relate to this character because it's real for them now. And one child who, and I'm saying child, he was an 11-year-old. So at that time, sometimes they can become a little bit skeptical of theatre, but he said, deep down, I know it's a story, but she was so real for me because I could recognise her sadness. And I think that's it. Yes, yeah, I'm in a very privileged position listening to children. So I don't think teachers do want too much of the hardcore, going back to the question. In my research, I did a lot of quantitative research because I know that whilst the teacher might not want it, the governing body might want value for money. And arts institutions, the Arts Council, other people might want to value what they can easily measure rather than actually what the emotional outcomes might be. So it's important to get that balance there.
And that's back to impact again, isn't it? You know, which impact can we measure?
Yeah, and both are important.
Yeah. Other thoughts on theatre's value to the curriculum?
Well, I think for us, what hinges for us are those really deep partnerships and relationships. So I would rather have a pool of 15 teachers that can talk to us and pick up the phone and have a meaningful relationship than have a database of 50. And for us, you know, that kind of folding in, the act of folding into the curriculum is one of learning on both parts. I mean, at Travelling Light, we operate a one programme approach. And that means that all our artistic activity, of which, you know, workshops, participation, outreach, is of equal standing in the way that we talk about the work to the shiny stuff, to the productions, to those that go out internationally and deal with that. It's of equal weight and it needs as much care. And it's very easy to undervalue one against the other, and also say, to put young people in certain boxes and say, oh, well, they get the workshop and they get the show. And really easy to compartmentalise, to do with what I was talking about before in terms of, you know, cultural collateral and what parents are most likely to access rather than schools. So for us, it's about having those really, I'm going to use your word, Elaine, those authentic relationships, actually. And we were having conversations in the summer which were very honest, with teachers saying, we do not know what to do. We do not know how we're going to open in September. You know, we cannot house a production. We've got teachers sat in broom cupboards because people are in bubbles and breakout spaces. I mean, these things are very real. Head teachers saying that they've spent 2 weeks doing risk assessments to see, you know, what they can do. And so many members of staff are shielding and, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, the key to that is about the conversations and about being open to not doing work as much as you're open to keeping our agendas in check, I think is quite important during this. And our own privilege and kind of drive doesn't unpick those really strong partnerships. And like I said, we listen, we really listen. So a teacher might be asking for one thing that might be curriculum based, but that might allow for a conversation and pathway and relationship to develop. less is more, basically.
And that takes it on a longer journey.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, what I'm talking about, you know, beneficiaries not being nameless with no agency. You know, we're not doing a, you know, we're not, our approach is not that. But actually, there's a chance for some meaningful feeding in. And when we say feeding in to the programme, we mean the whole programme, not just this school's project, but something that can work wider.
Yes, yeah, and that's ambitious. I like the ambition in that.
Yeah, I mean, we're not there yet, but we're trying.
That's all we can do. Erica, how about in the Netherlands in terms of curriculum, theatre feeding into curriculum?
Yes, well, I think for us, it's on the one, because on the one hand, you like these long-term relationships with schools for many years, where you can still come back every year or see them in very different projects. And on the other hand, we as a company, we need far more schools than we can hold long-term relationships with. So you have to find one way to connect to schools for just one moment or one performance, and explain what your type of theater is and what they can expect from us. And expect is a very well, you have to tell them the kind of theater you make and what how they take their children to see this, and how they can talk about it afterwards without knowing all the answers. That's what you, on the one hand, need to do just for this one connection that you make. And on the other hand, you need these long-term moments where you can invite a school to a tryout moment, to just and expect them to be okay with all the with it not being finished, or with it with us really trying to find a way. Or you find schools for projects that are long for 6 weeks, or that take longer times, and that you have a real connection. You know the teacher, and you know how to call them, and take them on the adventure that asks more of them than just visiting a theater and going back, and that's it. And we need both, because of the work we do, because of the broadness of the types of things we do. And one of the and I think we as a company, we are not responsible for the whole cultural education of one student. We take a really small part of that, and which can be very impactful, can be really eye-opening for the rest of their lives, for that matter. But on the other hand, it can be just one moment. And the school's responsible for this whole cultural education. And we don't, I don't want to fill these shoes. I don't want to, well, that's a Dutch expression probably, but that's not what I do as a company. We are just incidents, we're just moments, and we can do that, these moments, because we are unexpected, and because they don't know us, and because we've done a project with a school where one of the things of the feedback we got afterwards was that the strange haircuts and the strange clothes that our artists were just wearing, because that's what they were. But the fact that we were there for only 6 weeks and we did this, and the children, we asked them other questions than their teachers would normally do. But you can do that for 6 weeks. If you are there for 12 years, then this impact won't be the strangeness. So the fact that you're a guest, and that they come to visit you just for a moment, is also part of the impact that you're making, I think. So the fact that you're just someone else that they have to relate to for just a moment, because schools are so ordered, they are so well thought of, so scheduled, and we sometimes bring chaos, and that's our role, I think. So we have to just shake it up. And then the teacher, and we leave, and the teacher has to deal with those children that are like, and I think that's okay. And I think teachers like us to do that, well, not all of them, but most of them, or a lot of them do, like us to do that, to just shake things up, to just make a commitment for that moment, and we give our all for that moment, and we can only do it because we are only there for that moment.
Yeah.
And we don't have to come back the next day, but we can let it simmer after that. We can leave it to the teacher to talk with children about it and reflect on what they've been doing. And we have to give them tools to talk, or we have to give them ideas to not, so that teachers trust that they don't have to know the answer. I think that's quite an important part of education in a theater company, is that let teachers know you can just discuss the play even if you don't know what it's about. You can figure it out amongst yourselves. You can try everything, but I don't have to be there for all the conversations afterwards, because that's the role of the teacher. If we let them take that role,
it strikes
and they
me,
trust that they can do that.
Yeah, it strikes me, actually, you've just said the word I was going to say, so that was perfect, that there's so much trust implied in that relationship between artist and teacher, between visiting company and school, is there's mutual trust in place. That I wrote down potent disruption while you were talking, Erica, that this notion of like coming in and exploding something and leaving again, that you trust the educator to know, to have the skills to be able to play with what the terrain is that you've left in your wake, but also they trust you that disruption is going to be beautiful chaos. You know?
And let's be honest, that doesn't always work. I mean, sometimes we go there, we have this performance, and afterwards teachers are like, what the hell have you been doing? And you won't see us again. But on the other hand, if you can, and sometimes we go into schools, and we are going to do that more often now, just do a workshop afterwards, after the show, talk to the children, and do some theater exercises, or finding out what that should be, but just to show the teachers, your children, they experienced something during this performance, and you don't have to explain what it was that they experienced. They can explain for themselves, and they know for themselves.
Yes.
But we have to show teachers that they can sometimes, and that's an interesting part of the education work, to this surrounding the shows, finding this connection to teachers and children.
Yes. I'm going to move us to a live question now, because we've had a really lovely provocation stroke question come in from the fabulous Kathy Turner. So we're going to see if we can get her on to ask her question live. Kathy, are you able to ask your question live?
Yeah, thanks. I hope it's not disappointing now. I was just really struck, as I often am, really listening and thinking about how artists have to be so creative in response to an uncertain future, and the reframing of these kind of questions of like quality to just re-articulate that, so there's not actually an opposition between what you want to do and the pragmatics of it, that these are thought together, and that this is part of what one does is thinking creatively about an uncertain future, not going, that's the goal, okay, so I need to fit this box to get that thing, and not thinking without knowing that you need to kind of respond to people's needs, but framing it in a way that is addressing both these things at once as best you can. And then thinking about how Elaine was talking about, you need to have the quantitative and the qualitative, because some people want the quantitative and some people want the qualitative, and recognizing in that, from my, when I'm in the institution of the University of Exeter, that I recognize that kind of double game of needing to give them what they want, while I know that actually the more creative, the more sort of organic, in a way, development, long-term development is not that, can't be framed like that. And I just wonder whether Elaine had any thoughts about how can we redefine these conversations? I mean, I'm already thinking about going into a particular situation at work and drawing on this conversation to try and reframe that. You know, how do we use some of these insights to reframe conversations about an uncertain future in other contexts? Because I think we can learn a lot from the kinds of things that you're doing and saying.
Elaine, thoughts?
Thanks, Kathy. I think that you have to use both, and you have to insist that both are important, actually. And what I found is when I've delivered presentations about my research, some people will like the fact that I've used percentages, the amount that a child is more positive, their mood has changed. But on the whole, most people like the stories. They like to know that depth of research. And I think it's convincing people that they need to know about the individual. The individual matters. And I know it's a cliche, but individuals make up a group. And actually, my belief has always been, if you touch one person, then that's important. It doesn't have to be many. But I'm aware that not everyone sort of sees life like that. There was another part of your question that I was going to come back to, which is dealing with uncertain times, I think. And it sounds glib to say responsive and open, but I think the more responsive and open you are, and be aware that strange things will happen. So what's really struck me with Down to Earth is the way that often parents and families have become just as involved, and actually having the theatre company come in and the impact that they see on their child, going and taking away from the classroom what they're doing in their bedroom as a response to the theatre, and then feeding that back to the school, is actually really important, keeping that communication going. And I'm going slightly off the question, but I want to come back to something that Erica said, that I think trust is important and building up a relationship with schools. And I think the schools are working exceptionally hard, but sometimes the communication is with a teacher who books the theatre company to come in, who is an absolute advocate, and they think it's wonderful, but there needs to be preparation, particularly if you're performing in a whole school to every class. There needs to be that preparation for others to be able to know what's happening. And I think they do need more tools. So it's always amazed me how we have a role to educate them in how to lead a discussion and how to lead a discussion that's open and creative. So possibly, Kathy, going back, we have a role to advocate for our kind of value and our kind of research, but recognise where they are coming from is because they feel secure in that, not necessarily that they don't undervalue what we're saying. It's just that it's what they know. I don't know if that's helped or not.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. I've written down storytelling, trust, and tools here.
Yeah.
That's it, done.
And what we're looking for in the moment is also to do with not only with language, not only talking language, part of language, but how can you reflect on theatre without it only being about explaining or talking or telling what you saw, or can you do it in movement, or can you do it? That's a way we are trying to find ways to do that, which is, well, I'm not sure about where we will end up, but that's what we're exploring right now because and on the other hand, for teachers, language is the most spoken language, or written language is the most graspable, or is the one that they're most comfortable with, but can we show them other ways? And can you think about something without actually giving it words? But we'll see. If I know the answer, then I'll come back and tell you.
Please do, because I think doing the dance of uncertainty at some high-level university strategy meeting is the way forward.
I love that idea.
Me too, actually.
Or drawing it, getting them to draw it.
Kathy, I'm going to pick up just and try and be quite brief on this. So I think, you know, we're kind of joining this up together. The Travelling Light, we decided to not issue an annual report this year in our traditional way. I know, look at the raised eyebrows I see across the screen. And what we've done instead is we've created an impact report. So I think there's something about us framing our conversations within our funders, our networks, within, you know, the man on the street, our beneficiaries, our participants, and making sure that that's a lived language and a lived experience. It's not just for this echo chamber that we are sat in right now, as lovely as it is and as wonderful as it is hearing you all. The other interesting point you give up, I wish I could interrogate this more, but I think it's just kind of forming in my head as I talked about it earlier, which is about the need to be open and responsive. And that's why I talked at the beginning of this about, you know, Travelling Light really focusing our aims onto what we are constitutionally and what are our values. Because it's really easy when you're trying to be really open and really responsive in a time of whirlwind, when you're trying to also navigate a storm, to be knee-jerk and to be funder-led and to make rash decisions because you feel the panic of needing to make those decisions or to be seen to make decisions. And I think that kind of, like I said, breathing in, leaning into the discomfort of us not knowing what's happening is really important now in terms of our navigation of this time as artists and you know, leaders of companies, as academics, leaning into the fact that it is uncomfortable and that we don't necessarily know what's coming ahead, but we need to stick in our lane so we don't do ourselves a disservice is really, really important. I mean, I think there's something that we can learn from business, we can learn from outside this sector at this time, which is about how we grow ourselves out of this pandemic. How do we as artists and theatre makers evolve and make space for whatever this new world is, that we are relevant and radical and bold and all the things, and trusting and authentic, the words that we've used, a plethora of them today. And that's really important for me at Travelling Light, is making sure that we are sticking our lane and that we're really anchored to what we're doing, because it is so tempting to respond to that lovely, you know, funder's email to do something knee-jerk when actually it may not be where your focus might need to be right now.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Kathy, do you want to say anything in response to any of that?
I mean, I just think that's brilliant. I'm taking notes madly, not for use in making children's theatre, but, you know, just thinking about that in other ways in life generally. Actually, I've moved on from the strategic meeting even, but I mean, that too, you know, the idea of the lived language, I mean, that's absolutely it, I think. That's really inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a great question. We've had a bit of a follow-up question actually connected to that one, which I think is a helpful one actually. I've written down lots of things while you've been talking about doing things on our terms, defining things on our terms, advocating on our terms, but there is a very real reality, I think, also. And Michael Judge, who's the Associate Director at NIE Theatre, just said, building on Kathy's question, and this is directed to you, Elaine, but anyone can step in if you want. He said, how would you present your quantitative evidence to a school leader who is interested in hearing about curriculum-specific outcomes? So that act of translation, or the languages that we use, being very conscious and targeted sometimes about being anchored to what we do, staying in our lane, but also being aware we need to change our languages to suit different audiences. Elaine, do you have any thoughts about that one?
I think one of my questions was very much about education and theatre, and I worked with 6 case study schools, 6 case study teachers who did use the Theatre Alibi production as a means to stimulate learning. And so in a way I would be in a good position, Michael, because 3 of those chose to take literacy and national curriculum work. They intended to blend the performance. And I know that when I started the PhD, I think I was a bit concerned. As a former teacher, I was concerned that teachers didn't just have the performance and forget about it. And actually, my views changed over that. I think the performance has an incredible value, whether it's followed up or not. But I also was very mindful, and lots of people, theatre makers, as well as head teachers, said to me, but if teachers follow it up, it takes the magic of the performance away. And actually, one of my findings is that it doesn't, actually. Children are good at being able to distinguish, this is my normal classroom work, this is the theatre. And what I found, and it was quantitative data, that actually both improved. So the progress of children improved because they'd been motivated to use the performance, but also the enjoyment of the performance for the theatre maker also was more positive. So I think there are arguments that you can take into head teachers. I think you have got to, you've got to be a sensitive advocate, really. You've got to recognise where they're coming from as well. But if I look at Ofsted Speak and I look at the new national curriculum, the new Ofsted framework, it's about developing whole children. It's not actually about developing a percentage of children to get this percentage at level 5 or at GCSE or whatever. And I think children, particularly now in this pandemic situation, need to be emotionally aware, they need to have good emotional development, and they need to have a more sophisticated, sensitive, emotional literacy than I think they've had in the past, and be resilient. You know, all of those are things that theatre performances and the arts can help give children those tools, I think. And I sometimes perhaps we don't recognise those and celebrate those enough.
And it strikes me a little bit, I'm hoping my mic is working enough for you to be able to hear. It strikes me that there's a case to be made for the artist, the teaching artist, as a key worker in that. So the notion of theatre makers or those with specialisms in this field being seen as having particular skill sets around nurturing emotional intelligence. And I do think there's a job of work there that we can do from an advocacy point of view, nationally, internationally, locally, globally, about what we're good at right now. But we have to do it together. It has to be joined up work, I think. And we're going to have to wrap up now because we're tight for time. I'm so sorry because this has felt like such a rich, collaborative, joyful conversation. And actually, I've got a piece of paper full of new terms. I've written down that we need to be sensitive, anchored advocates who are comfortable with uncertainty. No pressure. But I want to say a big thank you to our 3 panelists today for your listening, for your wisdom, for your articulateness. Yeah, it's been really enjoyable to listen to you. And I want to say an enormous thank you to our attendees, and thank you for bearing with my patchy mic as well, everyone. I appreciate that. And just to look out for an email which will be coming your way from Theatre Alibi with a few links. And we hope to see you joining us again next week, where we are back, and we are back on the 3rd of December with a really knockout final panel of people. So please do join us next Thursday, the 3rd at 1 p.m. And we'll look forward to seeing you all then. Have a lovely week, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.